The recycled air aboard the Meridian's edge carried the familiar cocktail of metal polish, hydroponic nutrients, and the faint ozone smell that always lingered around the quantum drive cores. Lieutenant Commander Harrison Vale had grown so accustomed to it over the past 18 months that he barely noticed anymore, though newcomers to his ship often wrinkled their noses and asked if something was burning. Today, however, something was different about the atmosphere in the command center. A tension that had nothing to do with atmospheric processors and everything to do with the blinking red emergency beacon filling their main display. "How long has it been transmitting?" Harrison asked, settling into his command chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent more time in zero-G than planetside. The chair's biosensors immediately synced with his neural implant, flooding his peripheral vision with ship status data that would have overwhelmed a civilian but felt as natural as breathing to him. "Approximately 14 hours, sir," reported Communications Officer Kim Santos, her fingers dancing across haptic interfaces that flickered with alien precision. "Signal's clean, no interference, but it's coming from the restricted zone near the Kepler 442 asteroid field." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. The asteroid field was technically off-limits to commercial vessels. Too much gravitational interference from the binary star system made navigation hazardous, and the insurance companies had long since declared it a no-fly zone. Which made the presence of a distress beacon both puzzling and concerning. "Any identification codes?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "That's the weird part, sir. The beacon's broadcasting standard emergency frequencies, but the encoding is." Santos paused, consulting her displays with a frown that would have been comical if not for the seriousness of the situation. "Well, it's like someone took our protocols and ran them through a translation matrix designed by very polite aliens." Chief Engineer Rodriguez looked up from his station with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this far more than regulations probably allowed. "So either we've got a ship full of extremely courteous pirates, or we've stumbled onto something that's going to make our insurance premiums go through the roof." The comment drew a few chuckles from the bridge crew, though Harrison noticed that Navigator Chen was conspicuously silent, her attention focused on the gravitational modeling display with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly vicious puzzle. He'd learned to trust Chen's instincts over the years. She had an almost supernatural ability to read space weather that had saved them from more than one close call with cosmic debris. "Chen, what's your assessment of the field?" Harrison asked. She looked up, pushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes. "It's doable, sir, but we'll need to drop to impulse power and plot a very careful course. The gravitational eddies are playing havoc with the usual navigation algorithms, but if we treat it like threading a needle made of dark matter and good intentions, we should be fine." "Reassuring," Harrison murmured, though he was already running calculations in his head. The Meridian's Edge was a sturdy ship, built for the kind of long-haul cargo runs that kept the outer colonies supplied with everything from coffee to quantum processors. She wasn't exactly built for rescue operations, but maritime tradition was maritime tradition, whether you were on Earth's oceans or drifting through the void between stars. "Sir," Santos interrupted, "I'm picking up something else. The beacon's signal strength is increasing, but there's no Doppler shift. Whatever's transmitting is stationary relative to our position." Rodriguez whistled softly. "That's either very good engineering or very bad physics." Harrison felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. Every regulation in the book said they should report the beacon to the appropriate authorities and continue on their scheduled route to the mining stations near Proxima Centauri. Every instinct he'd developed during 20 years of service said that someone out there needed help, and help was something you didn't postpone for bureaucratic convenience. "All right, people," he said finally, his voice carrying the tone that meant a decision had been made and arguments were no longer welcome. "We're going to take a look. Chen, plot us the safest course you can manage. Rodriguez, I want the shields at maximum and all non-essential systems powered down. Santos, keep monitoring that beacon and let me know if anything changes." "Aye, sir," came the chorus of responses, and Harrison felt the subtle shift in the ship's acceleration as they altered course toward the asteroid field. The next 3 hours passed with the peculiar mixture of boredom and tension that characterized most space operations. Harrison found himself pacing the bridge more than usual, pausing occasionally to peer over shoulders at various displays, though he was careful not to hover. His crew was good, some of the best he'd worked with. And they didn't need him breathing down their necks while they navigated the treacherous gravitational currents of the asteroid field. "Contact," Chen announced suddenly, her voice sharp with excitement. "Bearing 27 Mark IV, distance approximately 50,000 kilometers." The main display shifted to show a magnified view of their destination, and Harrison felt his breath catch. Floating amid the tumbling rocks and ice chunks was something that definitely hadn't been built in any human shipyard. The object was roughly ovoid, perhaps 30 meters long, with a surface that seemed to shift between mirror-bright silver and deep, opalescent blue depending on the angle of observation. It looked less like a spacecraft and more like a piece of jewelry that had been scaled up by someone with more artistic sense than engineering knowledge. "Well," Rodriguez said after a moment of appreciative silence, "that's either the most beautiful escape pod I've ever seen, or someone's been holding out on us regarding the state of alien interior design." "Life signs?" Harrison asked, surprised to find his voice slightly hoarse. Santos bent over her console, fingers flying across controls that hummed with barely contained energy. "Confirmed, sir. 1 occupant, vital signs are. Well, they're consistent with human physiology, but there are some anomalies I can't account for." "Define anomalies." "Heart rate's a bit slow, brain activity patterns are more complex than baseline human, and there's something that might be a secondary nervous system, though that could be sensor error." Harrison nodded slowly. "All right, bring us alongside. Rodriguez, prep the docking bay and make sure medical is standing by. Santos, try hailing them on standard frequencies." "Already tried, sir." No response, but the beacon's still active. As they drew closer, the alien craft's beauty became even more apparent. Its surface wasn't merely reflective, it seemed to contain depth, as if the hull were made of crystallized starlight that had been somehow convinced to hold a stable form. Harrison found himself wondering what kind of technology could produce such an effect, and whether the aesthetic choices were deliberate or simply a byproduct of advanced engineering. "Docking clamps secure," Rodriguez reported. "Atmospheric pressure is stable, composition is interesting. 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, 1% trace gases, but the molecular structure of the oxygen is slightly different from standard. More organized, if that makes sense." "It doesn't," Harrison replied, "but then again, most of today isn't making sense. Can we establish an airlock seal?" "Already done, sir. Whoever built this thing was either remarkably compatible with our technology or—" Rodriguez paused, consulting his displays with a puzzled expression. "Or their ship is actively adapting to interface with ours. Which is either really helpful or really alarming, depending on your perspective." Harrison was beginning to suspect it might be both. Dar. Elena Vasquez had seen her share of unusual patients during her 15 years practicing xenobiology, but nothing had quite prepared her for the woman currently occupying Medical Bay 3. The initial scans had been confusing enough, human physiology with subtle variations that suggested either very advanced genetic modification or an evolutionary path that had diverged from Earth's baseline sometime in the distant past. But it was the patient's ears that really captured everyone's attention. They were undeniably elegant, rising to delicate points that extended perhaps 3 centimeters beyond where human ears would normally end, with a graceful curve that reminded Elena of the illustrations in her daughter's fairy tale books. The effect was striking rather than alien, beautiful in a way that made the medical staff keep finding excuses to check on their patient's condition. "Any change in her neural activity?" Harrison asked, entering the medical bay with the careful steps of someone who'd spent the last 6 hours consuming nothing but coffee and nervous energy. "Still unconscious, but stable," Elena replied, adjusting the biomonitor displays with practiced efficiency. "Her brain patterns are fascinating, though. There's definitely higher-order cognitive activity happening, but it's structured differently than human consciousness. More layered, I suppose. Like she's thinking on multiple levels simultaneously. Is that good or bad? Honestly, I have no idea. But her vital signs are strong, and there's no indication of trauma or distress. She might just be sleeping off whatever happened to her ship. Harrison nodded, though Elena noticed he couldn't seem to stop glancing at their patient. She couldn't really blame him, even unconscious, the woman possessed an otherworldly grace that was difficult to ignore. Her dark hair seemed to contain subtle highlights that shifted in the artificial light, and her skin had a faint luminescence that made Elena's medical scanners occasionally hiccup in confusion. Any luck with the universal translator? Harrison asked. Actually, yes, Elena said, brightening. The AI has been analyzing the linguistic patterns from her ship's computer core, and it thinks it can manage basic communication once she wakes up. Apparently, her language has some structural similarities to ancient Sanskrit, which is either a remarkable coincidence or evidence that someone's been visiting Earth longer than we thought. Great. Just what I needed to make this situation more complicated. The woman's eyelids fluttered, and both Harrison and Elena froze. After a moment, violet eyes opened, blinking slowly as they focused on the medical bay's ceiling. When she turned her head and saw them watching her, she didn't appear startled or afraid, merely curious, as if waking up in an alien medical facility was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She spoke, and her voice was like music played on instruments that didn't quite exist, melodic and harmonious in a way that made Elena's universal translator work overtime. The device chimed softly before producing a translation in crisp, slightly formal English. I apologize for the inconvenience of my presence. Are you the ship's healers? Elena blinked in surprise. Yes, I'm Dr. Vasquez, and this is Lieutenant Commander Vale. You're aboard the cargo vessel Meridian's Edge. We found your ship in distress. The woman, girl, really, she couldn't be more than 25 by human standards, attempted to sit up, moving with a fluid grace that suggested either excellent physical conditioning or significantly different bone and muscle structure. Elena moved to help her, noting that her patient's body temperature was slightly lower than human normal but seemed to be perfectly healthy. I am called Liraleth, she said, the translator rendering her musical speech into words that carried only the faintest hint of accent. I am grateful for your assistance, though I fear my presence may create complications for your mission. Why would you say that? Harrison asked, moving closer to the bedside with the careful approach of someone trying not to seem threatening. Liraletha's smile was both beautiful and slightly sad. Because I suspect your people have not encountered mine before, and first contact situations tend to involve a great deal of paperwork. Elena couldn't help but laugh. You're not wrong about the paperwork. Though I have to say, if all first contact scenarios went this smoothly, xenobiologists would be out of a job. What happened to your ship? Harrison asked. Liraletha's expression darkened slightly. Pirates. They were more aggressive than my people expected. Our defensive systems were not designed for such direct confrontation. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. My people prefer to observe rather than engage. We have been watching younger civilizations develop, learning from them, but always from a distance. Younger civilizations? Elena asked. How old is your species? By your calendar. Perhaps 200,000 years of recorded history. But we are not the oldest among the stars. Liraletha's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Though we do occasionally act like teenagers when it comes to galactic politics. Harrison and Elena exchanged glances. 200,000 years of civilization suggested technology and knowledge far beyond human capabilities, yet their patient seemed remarkably normal. Friendly, even, with a sense of humor that translated surprisingly well. I realize this might be a sensitive question, Elena said carefully, but why do you look so much like us? The years aside, you could pass for human. Liraleth tilted her head thoughtfully, the gesture somehow enhanced by her pointed ears. Convergent evolution is more common than most species realize. Intelligence tends to develop along similar pathways, and form often follows function throughout the galaxy. Though. She paused, touching one of her ears self-consciously. These do serve a purpose beyond aesthetics. Enhanced hearing, better pressure sensitivity, and they help regulate body temperature in varying atmospheric conditions. That's actually brilliant, Elena said. Evolution as engineering. My people would be pleased by your appreciation. We take considerable pride in our practical elegance. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm system. Commander, you might want to see this. Our guest's ship is doing something interesting. Harrison sighed. Define interesting, Chief. Well, sir, it appears to be repairing itself. And I mean completely repairing itself. Hull breaches are sealing, systems are coming back online, and the power signature is increasing steadily. At current rate, it'll be fully operational within 6 hours. That's impossible, Elena muttered. Self-repairing technology, Liroleth said matter-of-factly. Standard safety feature on all Veiltheri vessels. Though the process is usually faster when the ship's operator is conscious to guide it. Harrison stared at her. You can control your ship's repairs telepathically. Not telepathically, exactly. More like symphonic engineering. Our technology responds to harmonic frequencies that we can produce naturally. It's rather like conducting an orchestra, if orchestras were made of quantum processors and crystalline matrices. Of course it is, Harrison said weakly. Because regular engineering wasn't complicated enough. Elena was already reaching for her scanner, professional curiosity overriding social etiquette. Would you mind if I ran some tests? This is absolutely fascinating from a bioengineering perspective. I would be honored to contribute to your research, Liroleth replied graciously. Though I should warn you that my physiology may prove somewhat puzzling to your instruments. As if summoned by her words, Elena's scanner began producing readings that made no sense whatsoever. According to the device, Liroleth simultaneously possessed 2 hearts, 1 heart, and possibly no heart at all, depending on which sensor array was active. Well, Elena said after a moment of staring at the conflicting data, that's definitely going in my unusual cases file. Perhaps your instruments are simply not calibrated for Veiltheri biology, Liroleth suggested helpfully. We exist in a slightly different phase relationship with normal matter. It makes us surprisingly difficult to scan accurately. Different phase relationship? Harrison asked. Imagine if your species had evolved to be naturally quantum entangled with your immediate environment. Not quite in this dimension, not quite in the next, but existing comfortably in both. It provides certain advantages, energy efficiency, enhanced cognitive processing, immunity to most toxins, but it does make medical examinations rather challenging. Elena looked like someone had just handed her the keys to the universe. That's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements alone would be manageable if you understood how to harmonize with quantum fluctuations rather than fighting them, Liroleth finished gently. Your species is remarkably resourceful, Dr. Vasquez. Given time, I suspect you'll discover these principles naturally. Harrison's comm unit chimed with an incoming message priority marker that made his stomach clench. Corporate communications, flagged as urgent. He glanced at the timestamp and realized they were still 3 days out from their scheduled check-in, which meant someone had been monitoring their transmissions and wanted answers about their unexpected detour. Problem, Commander? Liroleth asked, apparently reading his expression with disturbing accuracy. Just the usual bureaucratic complications, Harrison replied. Nothing that won't sort itself out. But even as he said it, he had the uncomfortable feeling that he was being far too optimistic. The hydroponics bay had never been quieter, which was saying something considering it was normally one of the most peaceful sections of the Meridian's edge. Harrison found Liroleth there most mornings now, sitting cross-legged among the tomato plants with her eyes closed and her pointed ears twitching slightly as if she were listening to something only she could hear. The plants seemed to approve of whatever she was doing. They'd grown 3 times faster than normal over the past week, producing fruit that was not only larger but somehow more vibrant than anything Harrison had ever seen from their standard agricultural systems. "Are you talking to them?" he asked, settling down beside her with 2 cups of coffee that had been brewing since the night shift ended. Lireleth opened one violet eye and smiled. "Not talking, exactly. More like, harmonizing. Plants are remarkably good listeners, but they prefer music to conversation." "Of course they do." Harrison handed her one of the cups, noting how she always held it with both hands as if it were something precious. She'd explained that Valefairy considered shared beverages to be a form of social bonding, which made the crew's coffee breaks unexpectedly meaningful cultural exchanges. "Any particular genre they prefer?" "Classical, surprisingly. Though Engineer Rodriguez's collection of ancient Earth jazz seems to make the carrots particularly enthusiastic." Harrison nearly choked on his coffee. "Rodriguez has been playing jazz for the vegetables. He said it improved their character." "I'm inclined to agree. The root vegetables have developed remarkably complex flavor profiles. The past week had been a study in surreal normalcy." Lireleth had integrated into the ship's routine with an ease that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. She'd proven remarkably adept at understanding human technology, often anticipating system failures before the diagnostic programs even registered anomalies. Yesterday, she'd prevented a potentially catastrophic coolant leak in the port engine by humming a specific frequency that somehow convinced the quantum containment field to stabilize itself. "Commander," Santos's voice crackled over the comm system, "you've got another priority message from corporate." "Same classification as yesterday's." Harrison's good mood evaporated. The messages had been arriving daily, each one more insistent than the last. Legal departments wanted detailed biological scans. Corporate security demanded psychological profiles. The Xenobiology Division had submitted a requisition for exclusive research rights that made Harrison's skin crawl with its clinical detachment. "Tell them I'm still preparing my preliminary report," Harrison replied. "Sir, I think they're getting impatient. This one came with a legal addendum about salvage rights and, Santos paused uncomfortably. "Property classification protocols." Lireleth's expression didn't change, but Harrison noticed her ears angle forward slightly, a gesture he'd learned indicated focused attention. "Property classification?" she asked quietly. Harrison felt heat rise in his cheeks. "It's complicated. According to interstellar maritime law, any sentient being rescued from a disabled vessel in unclaimed space can be temporarily classified as salvage until proper legal status is established." "Ah." Lireleth nodded thoughtfully. "So I am technically cargo until someone decides otherwise." "It's just bureaucratic nonsense," Harrison said quickly. "No one's actually treating you like property." "Of course not. You've all been remarkably kind." Lireleth sipped her coffee with the same serene expression she wore while communing with vegetables. "Though I imagine this creates certain complications for you professionally." That was putting it mildly. Harrison had spent the last 3 nights lying awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the implications of the legal documents that kept arriving with each transmission burst. According to the lawyers, Lireleth could be classified as an extremely valuable asset, a living representative of an advanced alien civilization with knowledge that could revolutionize human technology. The fact that she was obviously intelligent, articulate, and possessed of her own agency seemed to be considered irrelevant details. "Commander Vale," Lireleth said suddenly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. In your experience, how do humans typically respond when they're faced with situations that challenge their fundamental assumptions about right and wrong?" Harrison considered the question carefully. "Depends on the human. Some people adapt, some people panic, and some people start looking for loopholes." "And which category do you fall into?" "I'm still figuring that out." Rodriguez's voice echoed through the hydroponics bay as he entered with Navigator Chen close behind. "Commander, we've got a situation developing that you need to know about." "Define situation," Harrison said, though he was fairly certain he didn't want to hear the answer. "Corporates dispatched a security team to meet us at Titan Station," Chen said without preamble. 3-ship escort, full legal authority, and orders to take custody of our salvaged materials for proper evaluation. Lireleth raised an eyebrow. "I assume that's a polite euphemism for me." "Among other things," Rodriguez said grimly. "They're also confiscating your ship for technological analysis." "Ah. Well, that's disappointing but not entirely unexpected." Lireleth stood gracefully, brushing imaginary dust from her borrowed jumpsuit. "How long until we reach this station?" 18 hours, Chen replied. "Give or take." "Plenty of time, then." Lireleth moved among the plants, touching leaves here and there with gentle fingers. "These will need extra water while I'm gone." They've grown rather fond of their routine. The casual way she said it, as if being handed over to corporate security for indefinite detention was merely a minor inconvenience, made Harrison's chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like panic. "There has to be another option," he said. "Perhaps," Lireleth agreed. "Though I confess I'm curious about your corporate research facilities. It's been some time since I've had the opportunity to observe human scientific methodology firsthand." "This isn't a field trip," Harrison snapped, then immediately felt bad about his tone. "They're not inviting you for afternoon tea and polite conversation." "No, I imagine not." Lireleth's smile was gentle but somehow sad. "Though I do appreciate your concern, Commander. It's been refreshing to encounter humans who view me as a person rather than a specimen." Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Actually, there might be another way to handle this." Everyone turned to look at the chief engineer, who had the expression of someone who just realized he might be about to say something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. "The legal classification hinges on salvage rights, correct?" Rodriguez continued. "Specifically, on the premise that Lireleth was rescued from a disabled vessel in distress." "That's right," Harrison said slowly. "But what if she wasn't? What if she was a passenger who booked passage on our ship through proper channels?" Chen's eyes widened. "You want to forge passenger manifest documents?" "I want to explore all available options," Rodriguez corrected. "Technically, if someone were to have purchased passage before we encountered the distress beacon, they'd be a paying customer rather than salvage." "That's..." Harrison paused, considering the implications. "That's either brilliant or completely insane." "Why not both?" Lireleth asked cheerfully. "I find that the best solutions often are." "There's just one problem," Chen said. "Even if we could backdate the paperwork, corporate would demand to know how she got aboard in the first place." "We've been in deep space for weeks." "Transfer from another vessel," Rodriguez suggested. "Happens all the time in the outer systems." "Which vessel?" Harrison asked. "The Quantum Serendipity," Lireleth said promptly. "Captain Morrison's an old friend of my family. He'd be happy to confirm that he dropped me off 2 weeks ago." Everyone stared at her. "There is no ship called the Quantum Serendipity," Harrison said finally. "There could be," Lireleth replied with a perfectly straight face. "Quantum mechanics are remarkably flexible when it comes to retroactive causality." Rodriguez laughed despite himself. "I like the way you think." "The problem is," Chen said slowly, "even if we could make the paperwork work, we'd still need to explain how she integrated so seamlessly into ship operations without anyone reporting it to corporate." "Simple," Lireleth said. "You hired me as a consultant. Xenobotanical specialist with expertise in quantum harmonics and agricultural optimization. My results in the hydroponics bay speak for themselves." Harrison found himself grinning despite the situation. "And I suppose you have credentials to support this cover story?" Commander, I've had 200,000 years to perfect my documentation skills. I think I can manage a convincing resume. This is completely insane, Harrison said. Absolutely, Rodriguez agreed cheerfully. Want to do it anyway? Harrison looked around at his crew. People he'd served with for years, who trusted his judgment even when it led them into situations that would probably violate several dozen regulations. Then he looked at Lireleth, who was watching him with those violet eyes that held depths of starlight and ancient wisdom, waiting patiently for him to decide whether she was a person or a piece of salvage. Santos, he called over the comm, I need you to do something that's probably going to get us all court-martialed. Aye, sir, came the immediate reply. What kind of court-martial are we talking about? The fun kind or the spend the rest of our lives in prison kind? I'm hoping for the fun kind, but I make no promises. Titan Station loomed ahead like a mechanical flower blooming in the void, its rotating sections catching and reflecting the distant light of Saturn's rings. Harrison stood on the bridge watching the docking procedures unfold with the kind of calm that came from either complete confidence or utter resignation. He wasn't entirely sure which category he fell into, but at this point it hardly mattered. Corporate security vessel Arbitrator is requesting permission to come aboard immediately upon docking, Santos reported, her voice carefully neutral. They're also asking for manifest confirmations and passenger documentation. Tell them we'll be happy to accommodate them once we've completed standard docking procedures, Harrison replied. And remind them that safety protocols require a minimum 30-minute systems check before allowing external personnel aboard. That'll buy us some time, Rodriguez muttered from his engineering station. Though I'm not sure 30 minutes is enough to make this plan any less insane. Lireleth emerged from the lift, carrying a data pad and wearing the kind of serene expression that Harrison had learned usually preceded either profound wisdom or spectacular chaos. She'd spent the last 6 hours in her quarters, allegedly preparing documentation to support their improvised cover story. The fact that she'd managed to produce what appeared to be genuine corporate credentials, complete with security holograms and authentication codes, was either a testament to her technological prowess or evidence that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. How are you feeling about all this? Harrison asked her quietly. Remarkably calm, considering I'm about to either commit fraud on an interstellar scale or exercise my fundamental rights as a sentient being, she replied. Though I admit I'm curious to see how your legal system handles the concept of retroactive passenger manifests. You and me both. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant thud that Harrison felt in his bones. Through the viewports, he could see the sleek lines of the corporate security vessels arranged in what was either a protective formation or a very polite blockade. The lead ship, Arbitrator, was a Meridian-class heavy cruiser designed for exactly this kind of operation, fast, well-armed, and crewed by people who took their legal authority very seriously. Incoming hail from Arbitrator, Santos announced. They're requesting immediate transport for a boarding party of 12. 12. Chen whistled softly. That's not a boarding party, that's an invasion force. Tell them we're happy to accommodate a standard inspection team of 4, Harrison said. Station safety regulations, you understand. They're not going to like that, Santos warned. I'm sure they'll find a way to cope with their disappointment. The next 20 minutes passed with the peculiar tension that preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or spectacular disasters. Harrison used the time to review Lireleth's documentation one final time, marveling at the attention to detail she'd managed to achieve. According to her fabricated records, she was Dr. Lireleth Starweaver, a xenobotanical consultant with advanced degrees from universities that actually existed and employment history that would check out if anyone bothered to verify it through proper channels. How did you manage all this? He asked, scrolling through what appeared to be decades of academic publications. Quantum entanglement with information networks, she replied matter-of-factly. Once you understand how to harmonize with data streams, creating documentation becomes more of an artistic exercise than a technical challenge. You hacked the entire interstellar education database. Hacked is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as collaborative fiction. The airlock chimed, indicating the arrival of their visitors. Harrison straightened his uniform and tried to project the kind of confidence that came from having absolutely nothing to hide. The corporate security team that boarded consisted of 4 individuals who looked like they'd been assembled from a catalog of intimidating bureaucrats, sharp suits, sharper expressions, and the kind of body language that suggested they were accustomed to getting their way through a combination of legal authority and implied threats. The team leader, a woman with silver hair and eyes like winter ice, stepped forward with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar operations. "Commander Vale, I'm Director Sarah Chen of Corporate Security Division. We're here to take custody of the alien salvage designated in your recent transmissions." "Director Chen," Harrison replied with his most diplomatic smile. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. We have no alien salvage aboard this vessel." Director Chen's expression didn't change, but Harrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested surprise. "Commander, our records clearly indicate that you recovered a non-human entity from a disabled spacecraft approximately 1 week ago. Our records indicate that we responded to a distress beacon and provided assistance to a stranded passenger," Harrison corrected gently. "Dr. Lireleth Starweaver, who's been serving as our xenobotanical consultant for the past month." "I'm sorry, but that's impossible. Our monitoring systems show no record of any passenger transfers or consultancy agreements in your operational area." Lireleth stepped forward with a kind of graceful movement that managed to be both attention-getting and completely non-threatening. "Director Chen, I believe there may be some confusion regarding my employment status. Perhaps I can clarify the situation." She handed over her data pad with the same casual confidence someone might use to offer directions to a lost tourist. Director Chen accepted it with the wariness of someone who suspected they were being handed either a solution or a very elegant trap. "Dr. Starweaver," Director Chen read from the display, her voice carefully neutral. "Xenobotanical specialist, advanced degrees in quantum agriculture and harmonic plant biology from the University of New Geneva, currently under contract to." She paused, scrolling through the documentation. "This is quite an impressive resume. Thank you. I've always believed in maintaining professional standards." "The problem is," Director Chen continued, "these employment records indicate you've been working with Commander Vale's crew for the past 37 days. Our surveillance data shows that your alleged rescue occurred only 8 days ago." "Ah," Lireleth nodded thoughtfully. "I think I see the source of the confusion. You're operating under the assumption that my rescue and my employment are related events. Are you saying they're not?" "I'm saying that causality can be remarkably flexible when you understand how to work with quantum probability matrices. The rescue occurred 8 days ago from your perspective, but my employment contract was established 37 days ago from the ship's internal chronometer. Both statements are simultaneously true." Director Chen stared at her for a long moment. "That's not how time works. It is if you're thinking in terms of closed time-like curves and retroactive causality," Lireleth replied cheerfully. "Though I understand it can be confusing for species that experience time in a strictly linear fashion." One of Director Chen's subordinates leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Harrison caught fragments of words that sounded suspiciously like diplomatic immunity and first contact protocols. "Dar. Starweaver," Director Chen said finally, "are you claiming to be a representative of an alien government?" "Oh, goodness no. I'm a private contractor with expertise in agricultural optimization. The fact that I happen to be Veiltheory is purely incidental to my professional qualifications." "But you are admitting to being non-human." "I'm admitting to being a sentient being with extensive knowledge of quantum harmonics and plant biology who has been legally employed by this vessel's crew for over a month. My species is, as you noted, incidental." Director Chen looked like someone who'd started what she thought was a simple arrest and found herself trapped in a philosophical debate about the nature of reality. "Commander Vale, are you prepared to submit to a full investigation of these claims?" Harrison met her gaze steadily. "Director, I'm prepared to submit to any investigation you feel is necessary." I'm confident that our employment records, passenger manifests, and operational logs will support everything we've told you. And if we find discrepancies, then we'll deal with those issues through proper legal channels, Harrison replied. Though I should point out that questioning the professional credentials of a xenobotanical consultant who's increased our agricultural efficiency by 300% might not be the most productive use of your time. Director Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she handed the data pad back to Lireleth with the resigned expression of someone who'd realized they were dealing with a situation far more complex than their briefing materials had suggested. Dr. Starweaver, would you be willing to answer some questions about your background and your people? I'd be delighted, Lireleth replied. Though I should mention that any information I provide would be purely voluntary, given my status as a private citizen rather than salvage. Of course. Harrison felt something ease in his chest as he watched Director Chen shift from interrogation mode to diplomatic inquiry. It wasn't quite victory, but it was definitely progress. Commander, Director Chen said, turning back to him, I'll need to file a preliminary report on this situation. What would you like me to tell my superiors about the unusual circumstances of Dr. Starweaver's employment? Harrison considered the question carefully. Tell them that we've successfully established first contact with a representative of an advanced alien civilization who's expressed interest in cultural and scientific exchange. Tell them that she's proven invaluable as a consultant and that we'd like to continue working with her in that capacity. And tell them that if they're interested in learning more about Vale Fairy technology and agricultural techniques, they might want to consider offering her a permanent consulting position rather than treating her like a specimen. And if they ask about the legal implications, tell them that the legal implications are exactly what they should be when a sentient being chooses to work with humans of their own free will, Harrison said firmly. No more, no less. Director Chen nodded slowly. I think that's probably the right approach. Dr. Starweaver, would you be interested in expanding your consulting work to include other vessels and research facilities? I'd be honored to consider such opportunities, Lireleth replied. Though I do hope I'll be able to continue working with Commander Vale's crew. They've become quite dear to me. As the corporate security team prepared to depart, Harrison found himself reflecting on how much had changed since they'd first detected that mysterious distress beacon. A week ago, he'd been a cargo ship commander following routine procedures and avoiding bureaucratic complications. Now he was apparently humanity's first diplomatic contact with an ancient alien civilization, and somehow that felt exactly right. Commander, Lireleth said quietly as they watched the security team's shuttle depart, thank you. For what? For treating me like a person instead of a problem. It's a rarer gift than you might imagine. Harrison smiled, watching Saturn's rings turn slowly beyond the viewports. You know, I think we're going to need a bigger hydroponics bay. I was hoping you'd say that, Lireleth replied, her pointed ears angling forward with what he'd learned was her expression of pure happiness. I have some ideas about quantum tomatoes that I think you're going to find fascinating.